Morning, everyone, and good afternoon for those of you who are in Georgia, or Europe, or elsewhere. My name is Mamu Gatsareteli. I'm a founding executive director and since 2009, president of America-Georgia Business Council. Welcome to America-Georgia Business Council's 24th annual conference. Second year now, we are doing this conference online due to the circumstances and pandemic. While it has its definitely negative sides that we cannot be together, all of us, and share our views and experiences and glass of wine after the conference. It has its benefits as well. The people in different geographic time zones and places could be together. So that's what is happening today. We have speakers from Georgia, speakers from different parts of the United States, and we are together for this conference today. So our annual conference this year, like last year, will be several sessions, several online webinar sessions. Today is our first one where we are going to talk about status update about Georgian economy and about strategic priorities going forward. We'll also present a very interesting interview with a relatively newcomer to Georgian business scene, EPAM systems, with me, Arkady Dobkin, keynote interview. And later we'll present a very interesting project, American Hospital in Georgia, which will demonstrate one more time that even in times of COVID, there is a investments happening in Georgia, and some progress is happening, and there are different facets and aspects of this development, including in areas of healthcare, as well as other parts of economy, like our speakers for the first panel will indicate. Our first panel will focus on both policy perspective on economic development during pandemic. We have two speakers who will focus on macroeconomic picture. James John from International Monetary Fund, experienced economist, worked in different parts of the world, and since about 6 months ago became mission chief for Georgia at International Monetary Fund. And it's our first time that we will be working together in this session. IMF is a long-term partner for America-Georgia Business Council, so we are glad to have James joining us today. And James will focus more on policy perspective, and then Otar Sharikadze, again long-time partner for America-Georgia Business Council, will speak about the macroeconomic aspect of economic development in the last year and a half during pandemic, but focusing more on business perspective and business development perspective. Then our one of the founding members and partner from Rustavi Steel, Nugzar Kachukashvili, will speak about his very interesting experience of investing during the time of pandemic in Georgia. Tens of millions of dollars were invested in Rustavi Steel, and very interesting development there. But also we'll share some of his views about policy aspects of development of the Georgian economy as well. And then not least, last but not least, definitely our very, very good friend, longtime friend from U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, Mr. Kenneth Angel, who will speak about DFC's a very large portfolio of investments in Georgia, which is expanding and growing. And this last year and a half, there were significant investments made in Georgian economy from DFC as well. So while we all understand that things are not easy in Georgia, particularly in the areas of politics and soccer, we still have some good things to report. This will be, while positive in nature, but also constructive criticism will be also heard, I'm sure, during this conversation. So one of the overarching themes of this first panel and conversation for me personally was to somehow find a ways to speak about, and it's somewhat intellectual conversation as well as definitely practical conversation, how to make open economy like Georgia is function But it's also ensure that we have structural reforms. We have, we have long-term growth in mind and targeted, how to make sure that there is an employment, there is a short-term growth as well, and enough reforms are happening. So it's an interesting kind of question for all of us to think about. But before we jump into that discussion, I would like to ask James to maybe give us his perspective of the status of Georgian economy as of today. Thanks, James.
Great. Thank you so much, Mamuka, and to the American Georgia Business Council. It's a pleasure to be here for the first time. Happy to provide the IMF's views on Georgia and also to hear views from others. I would just note at the outset, and I'll share my screen in a second so you can see a few slides. We've just concluded our Article 4 consultation. This is our annual review of Georgia's economy. And with that, we also did, a separate team did a deep dive into the financial sector assessment program, or FSAP. So those exercises are just completed and all the documents are on the web. So if you have an interest in going a little deeper, please do take a look at those. And as you probably know, I'd also note that a EFF program was completed in April. But with that, let me share my screen and we'll go through recent developments and talk a little bit about policy priorities. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. Great. Okay, so to jump right in. So Georgia's been hit fairly hard by COVID-19. You can see in the red line there that the case numbers have generally been higher than some of its neighbors and some sort of peer countries in emerging Europe. We had a recent peak in August 2021. Cases have come down, quite a bit since then, but they are still elevated and rising again. And I have to say the number I saw this morning was discouraging. It was about 5,700 cases. So this remains a real challenge. So the pandemic has had a real serious impact on Georgia in terms of GDP. So what you can see in the right bar here and in the blue line, so GDP contracted by 6.2% in 2020. So a really significant contraction. The colored sort of parts of the columns help show that this reflects in particular lower net exports and investment. And in terms of sort of how things unfolded during 2020, there were some pretty serious lockdowns early in the pandemic and also late in 2020 with the spike in cases. Let me link this discussion of what happened on growth to the external sector. So the current account, which is the left chart here, really shows kind of what happened during the crisis. So the green line shows the deficit, the current account deficit on the right scale. It widened to a deficit of 12% of GDP, so quite large. And really what this reflected was a collapse in services income. So think tourism. Tourism revenue fell by 83% in 2020. So that gives you a pretty good idea of what happened. And you can see the services account really just collapsed there. I will say there was some resilience in terms of remittances. So what we show here are current transfers, the red block. Remittances actually have gone up during the pandemic, and that's provided some really important support to the economy. And when you see the right chart, you can see some of the impact that might be expected from this large deterioration in the current account deficit. So the exchange rate depreciated pretty sharply early in 2020. It's since come back quite a bit since spring 2021. You can see the black line shows the lari versus the dollar, and it's come back to sort of 313, 314, something like that after touching 345 earlier this year. And the nominal effective exchange rate and real effective exchange rates have also recovered substantially, which reflects also developments in some trading partners. So, it was really important to provide support to the economy during this exceptionally large contraction, and the government did provide necessary fiscal support to cushion the impact of the pandemic. So that was, substantial, about 3.8% of GDP in 2020. And about 2.9% of GDP in 2021 after we take into account a supplementary budget that was passed during the year. We have a breakdown here in terms of revenue and expenditure is broken down further between current and capital expenditure. And I would just note that capital expenditure has gone up over time. This was one of the objectives under the last program. And if you look during the crisis, capital expenditure was actually maintained at quite a high level, and you might not have expected that, but that does sort of help keep some momentum on some projects, like East-West Highway and things like that. If you look at the right chart, given the contraction in GDP and the much wider fiscal deficit, so I guess I forgot to flag it, but you can see the fiscal deficit was a little larger than 9% of GDP in 2020, so quite a big deterioration in the fiscal deficit. So not surprisingly, debt has gone up. Government debt rose to 60% of GDP in 2020, and about 80% of that is in foreign currency. That's something we do keep an eye on and worry about a little bit, but I also offer a little bit of a mitigating factor in that the foreign currency debt is largely to official creditors. And Georgia actually does have one bond, and it managed to roll that over in very favorable terms in the spring. So I also want to say a little bit here about inflation. So commodity and food prices have pushed up inflation. And so you can see in the red line is a headline CPI, the black line is core, and the blue line is the inflation target of 3%. So early in the crisis, inflation came down quite a bit. Demand was pretty weak. There are some other factors that also pushed inflation down. It has since risen substantially, and so it's about 12% year on year in the latest readings. The rise in inflation, we view it as largely reflecting the impact of earlier depreciation, utility price increases, and higher commodity and food prices. And these are global challenges. I want to emphasize that this is not just Georgia. A lot of countries are really experiencing challenges with inflation at this time. I can say more about this if anyone has questions. So looking ahead a bit more, a strong rebound, really a V-shaped recovery started in Q2. And so we saw just some really exceptional flash GDP estimates starting in April with a 45% year-on-year growth number. And they've really continued to be quite strong since then. So that's what you can see on the left chart. And 8-month growth through August was 12%. And I want to acknowledge, I mean, there are base effects because 2020 was a very weak year, but it's more than that. And we have projected that GDP will exceed the 2019 level already this year in 2021. So it's a very strong recovery. You can see on the right chart, there's the 6.2% contraction in 2020. We have a 7.7% growth for 2021 in our forecast. And then over the medium term, it's a little above 5%. In terms of what's driving the recovery, so it appears to be pretty broad-based, reflecting pent-up demand. So, some savings during the pandemic and people have come out spending. We see this in the savings developments. Strong remittances, which I mentioned earlier, a recovery in tourism. And anecdotally, we hear it's also domestic tourism. So people traveling within Georgia, not just international arrivals. And exports have also been quite strong. So imports, net exports, the number may not be a contributor to GDP, but exports have been quite strong during the pandemic as the recovery has proceeded. Okay, so maybe I could turn quickly to a few policy priorities. First is to really control the pandemic. This is, around the world, the pandemic is, just front and center everywhere as it should be. In our Article 4, we highlighted the pandemic and also political uncertainty as the two key risks to our outlook. Let me start with the pandemic, and then I'll say a little bit about the politics. So the government has not implemented, very serious lockdowns in 2021 the way it was done in 2020. And so in some sense, we're not seeing as much economic impact. But really, the long-term way to control the pandemic is through vaccinations. And so what you're seeing here is a very low level of vaccinations in Georgia, including lower than peers for some time. And this largely reflected a lack of availability of vaccines. Since more vaccines have come into the country, you see on the red line a really sharp increase starting in the summer up to a level, this is vaccinations per million. So, they got to around 20,000 or more people per day. That's since come down a bit. Now, if they could keep it up to about 20,000 a day, you'd get 60% of the population vaccinated by the end of the year. It's a bit lower, so there are some challenges to get that back up. I will say just a little bit of political situation. So we highlighted political uncertainty as a risk factor as well. We've had the first round of the local elections, and those were not followed by major protests. We do have runoff elections coming up. We have a former president in jail. So there are still some factors on the horizon that do contribute to a little bit of political uncertainty. But in the first round of the elections, the ruling party got 47% of the vote, and there had been this agreement, which sort of brokered by Charles Michel in the EU in April that suggested the possibility of early elections if they were below 43%. So they're well above 43. So it seems to take that off the table. There's a whole lot that we could talk about, I won't get into. But just to give a sense, that's still a factor, maybe a little bit less so than before these local elections, but not off the table. Okay, so what are some of the other priorities in addition to controlling the pandemic and sort of keeping in mind these risks? So reducing inflation. This is a slide I showed you before on the left. The NBG, National Bank of Georgia, has been quite active. As I said, this largely reflects external factors, but it is important to ensure that inflation expectations do not become entrenched. So on the right chart, you can see what the NBG has done. They're committed to bringing inflation back toward the target, and they've raised rates 3 times so far this year for a total of 200 basis points in monetary policy tightening. In terms of our forecast, we do expect quite high inflation this year, so 13% or so at the end of the year, 9% average for the year. But we do expect substantially lower inflation next year. So we're forecasting sort of 3% end of the year, maybe 5, a little bit more than 5 for the average. There's some factors that were idiosyncratic to 2021 that will drop out that give us some confidence that inflation will come down. But I do want to acknowledge, since Article 4, we've also seen continued high global energy prices. So, we'll have to take a look at that as well. So there are some risks there. Okay, key priority is to rebuild fiscal resilience as the economy recovers. So as I said, it was really appropriate for the government to provide substantial fiscal support given the really exceptional crisis that Georgia faced, but it did push the deficit up quite high. And so the challenge will be to bring the deficit and debt down over time. On this chart, you can see a blue horizontal line. That's the fiscal rule. So the fiscal deficit needs to be below 3% by 2023 to be in compliance with the fiscal rule. We think this can be done, and we think it's very important for Georgia's credibility that it honor the fiscal rule. And to get there, unwinding the COVID support measures that were put in place will go a long way, but not the whole way. So there will be some further adjustment measures needed. And if you take a look at our report, so we've highlighted, there will be maybe some tensions. I think the government has very ambitious capital spending plans, and so they want to keep capital spending high, but there's some current spending pressures as well. So things like education, some factors related to aging, such as health and pensions. And so to square that circle, to keep capital spending high, deal with current spending pressures, will take a little bit of work. We have recommended reviewing tax expenditures and strengthening tax administration as among some of the ways to help achieve the adjustment. So I just want to highlight also, they need to do some adjustment to get back in compliance with the fiscal rule, and that's the baseline, but there are fiscal risks as well. And so these largely come from state-owned enterprises, public-private partnerships, power purchase agreements. And there's steps that can be taken, and we've recommended strengthening public investment management, better integrating PPPs, PPAs, and public corporations into the budget process. What I show here on the chart is, generally weak performance of SOEs, and this is an ongoing challenge. And I do want to recognize that the authorities have done a great deal on SOEs in recent years. So they're the first country in the region to do a sectorization exercise and really thoroughly look at all the public corporations and think about which ones really can be operated on a commercial basis, which ones should be part of general government, et cetera, et cetera. They've developed a strategy in line with OECD principles, and this is to really have public corporations operate on a commercial basis. And they've started applying it to a Georgian state electro system. So I think that's good progress, but there's more to be done to finalize the strategy, apply this to more SOEs. And I also want to acknowledge that the Georgian government has been quite good in doing fiscal risk statements in recent years to help identify and then manage these risks. So in terms of the financial sector, really a lot of reforms were undertaken before the crisis, and that put the banking system in a good position to help be resilient through the crisis. We've actually seen credit growth sustained at a pretty strong level, even during the crisis. We project about 10% credit growth for this year. I'm not showing a slide on it, but we've seen resilience in terms of NPLs and a rapid recovery in bank profitability. So generally, the financial sector has come through pretty well, but it will require continued vigilance to maintain good supervision and regulation, ensure health there. And also, I want to highlight a long-term goal is to continue progress on de-dollarization. And so you can see on the right chart, the loan and deposit dollarization. And it has come down over time. And we found in our recent FSAP that Georgia really has a comprehensive set of tools to help deal with dollarization. But I want to emphasize this is a long-term effort. It does take a while. And then finally, one other area we emphasize is strengthening growth, and making it more inclusive. So Georgia has enjoyed, reasonably strong growth, around 5% before the crisis, and that's sort of what we expect after the crisis. And a good business environment, although I do look forward to hearing the comments from our next speaker in terms of the business environment. But we still see some opportunities to enhance growth and inclusiveness. And what I'm showing on this chart is unemployment, which has been quite high. It had been declining before the crisis, but with the crisis has risen to around 22% and remains well above Caucasus and Central Asia and emerging market Europe peers. I do want to note there's some methodological changes that have pushed this measure up. So the way they're accounting for self-employed. So this is higher than what you might have seen in past series. But when you do comparisons, it was high with the last series and this series, so higher than peers. So there's something going on there that I think there can be improvements. What we've highlighted are educational reform and active labor market policies, including strengthened vocational training to help get more people into the formal workforce. And we also have highlighted taking greater advantage of trade and tourism potential, and some of the infrastructure investment being undertaken now should help in that regard. So maybe I'll stop there. I'll look forward to the discussion. I hope that's given a good overview, and I'm happy to answer questions or go into more detail on any of this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think your last point is very important, definitely. I think in the regional context, some other countries probably do not count unemployed in a way that Georgia counts, but I'm sure that they face the same kind of problems, some more than some others maybe, but clearly the way unemployment is counted is definitely that has impact on overall picture. But we definitely know that Georgia has this problem and this long-term problem, and this is one of the subjects that probably we'll discuss later in the discussion section of this conference. Our next speaker is Otar Sharikadze. Otar, please give us your perspective about what's going on in Georgia.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Mamuka. First of all, glad to be back on your annual conference and very honored to be among these distinguished panelists. I'll prepare the short presentation. Let me quickly share my screen. A second. I hope that works. Hope everybody sees the presentation. And we can start. So basically, I prepared a short presentation which is split in two parts. Firstly, we'll discuss the condition of Georgian business, which went through the very difficult times and what's happening in the business in Georgia since second quarter of 2021. And then we're going to try to discuss open topics, open discussion for any new opportunities that the crisis might present to Georgian economy and Georgian business overall. If we look at the Georgian business overall, actually historically, Georgian business revenue has been growing quite significantly. It had a 9.2 average growth since 2015. However, in 2020, the growth obviously stopped due to obvious reasons. It was a very difficult time for everybody. But since 2021, we see the uplift, especially since quarter two, as James mentioned. We see significant growth in activity on the market. We see among the clients that we discuss daily, we see the optimism coming back, and we see investments being done in certain sectors. So business is quite optimistic. On the other hand, as James mentioned, we see the growth in credit in banks. So there is a demand for credit as well. So this is also a very positive sign for the growth ahead. Overall, if you look at the first half of 2021 revenue, the industry has generated around 44 billion lari of revenue, out of which around 54% is trade and 21% is industry. Now, if we look more into subsectors of the Georgian economy, you can see that number of sectors have recovered, and some of them had V-shaped recovery, the others W-shaped. But overall, things are turning positive. The only two sectors, obviously, which were very hit during pandemics was all sectors related to hospitality. The hospitals, even real estate, which was partly linked to income of inflow of foreign tourists to the country. But overall, you can see that the figures are not only positive compared to the 2020 as a base effect, but they are also surpassing figures are generated in 2019, which is again a positive impact aspect of the growth of this business. If we look more on a granular level of those industries, now if we look at the profitability of these sectors, you can see that fortunately the companies and the businesses managed to maintain their profitability. The profitability here is based on EBITDA level. And you can see that especially hospitality had, as I mentioned, was very hardly hit with the profitability in this sector was divided in two, but other sectors managed to maintain. Overall, the average profitability of the business sector was around 13% in 2019 and 12% in 2020, which is a very kind of a good, stable signal of stability, basically even in the hard period. Now, if we move forward and think what we think that we should be doing in the economy so that we accelerate the growth and we try to take into consideration the aspects which were mentioned in the previous presentation, namely the growing exports. So we will discuss the aspect of what we think should be done. We will discuss the aspects of FDI, which is a very important topic for the country like ours, and as we will mention also the need for capital market development in the country. If we look at the structure of Georgian economy, actually we can see that around 78% of the GDP is driven by services. And we are a very import intensive economy with very low export base. So if we look historically, the imports for local consumption as percentage of GDP, it's around 46%, and it's overall, it has always been in the range of 45%, whereas the exports only represent 12.4%. So what could we do in order to improve this figure of 12.4%? What we've done actually, and we've been doing this since the last couple of years because we think that this is a very important topic for the economy, we have looked at the import figures of the country. So we took as a reference a year 2019, as 2020 and 21 is not really a reference year for any country, I think, in the world. So if we look at 2019 figures, we imported around $9.1 billion worth of products, out of which $1 billion was for re-export. As you know, Georgia imports a lot of cars and then re-exports to regional countries. The same is done with pharmaceuticals, copper and tobacco. So we remain with approximately $8 billion of imports. And the question from our standpoint was to see which sectors had possibility to grow and to satisfy more local demand as well as be more export driven. So we discovered that there were two main outstanding sectors, which were food production and construction materials, which we believe holds the very significant opportunity for the economy. If we look at the construction industry, first of all, it's very import intensive. In 2019, the trade deficit driven only by the sector was around $1.7 billion, which represents around 32% of total trade deficit. On the other hand, if you look at the pipeline together, the public spending as well as private projects, we see that there are around $20 to $25 billion worth of projects to be implemented in the coming years up until 2025. So we see that there's a real big demand for this type of product. So, and if we look more into subsector level, we think that sectors like wire, rebar, plastic material, paint, even furniture, for instance, Georgia exports a lot of raw wood and then imports furniture. So maybe we could do something in this way as well. We ceramics as well, or any chemical productions which could be done in Georgia. So I think there we see a very significant potential to increase production and enhance export. So there we roughly estimate this figure to be around $400–500 million worth of production. On the other side, we see food products, which also entails, I think, the opportunity of producing more than $400 million worth of products locally. In a couple of figures regarding this subsector, in 2019, we imported around $1.1 billion of food products, while our export represents around $800 million, out of which around 73% was alcohol and beverages as well as nuts. So there were these two sectors represented around 75%. The remaining was really primary production, mostly primary production, so low added value products were exported. So in these terms, we see three sub-segments which could have a really important opportunity here. One of them is meat and dairy products, where, for instance, the import in 2019 was around $230 million. Here we see opportunity in growth in production of chicken meat, pork, and so on. we see a very significant uplift to be done in the cereal, fruits, and vegetable industry, where we see the opportunity. It is very important to develop, I think, the network of logistic hubs where these foods can be stored. This would kind of diminish the seasonal import, as well as one of the opportunities remains to be the processed food, which could process the primary production, which is done in Georgia, and then re-export more added value products. So overall, only in these two sectors, if we kind of work with local players, we could produce more than around $1 billion worth of products, which could partly be sold on the local market, but could be exported as well. Now, if we look at the bigger scale, obviously Georgia needs FDI for growth. There is one part to utilize the savings which are on the local market, but that needs kind of more effective ways of channeling these funds to the project, and we'll talk about this later. But overall, one of our key focuses would be FDI. I think Georgia historically has demonstrated a number of competitive advantages, and I won't go into details, but overall, that the fact that we have access to 2.3 billion market with very favorable business environment puts us on the scene to be able to attract FDIs. And throughout the years we've been doing this. There are a number of industries which have been very successful in attracting FDI. Some of them are listed here, particularly textile or business process outsourcing within recent years have had a number of success stories. But overall, we think that there are other sectors which needs to be taken care of, which is manufacturing, production of pharmaceuticals and chemical products, manufacturing of home appliances, as well as transport and logistics. Actually, the transport and logistics part has been quite active recently, with a number of investors looking into the sectors, and we believe that there is a number of investments which will take place in this sector. So this sector will become more and more attractive in the coming years. Now, overall, how do we do this? So this is a very important question, because listing these 6 industries is quite simple. Many countries have done it. The biggest question is the execution of this. So what we think needs to be done, and we've been discussing it throughout the years, is that we need to have a very clear, ambitious strategy of positioning Georgia on the market. We need to identify those sectors. We need to identify those international groups which could be willing and could be ready to investigate investment opportunities in Georgia, and get in touch with those groups and work with those groups on daily manner. So, but the most importantly, I think this should be raised on a governmental level. I think this should not be done only on the agency level. It should be done as certain European countries have done, like Poland, where we've seen the government involvement in this type of discussions with very big groups, and quite big number of success cases taken care over there. So I think this is something which we should pay more attention to, and we could drive more success out. Now, one of the topics I've mentioned regarding the use of investments which are done in the countries, I think we really need to develop our capital markets. There are a number of positive aspects of developing the market, but I would name just 4 of it, which would clearly reduce the capital cost for the companies and improve capital allocation. What I mean by that is that by developing capital markets in Georgia, most of Georgian companies would be able to find funds to their needs of the size of their investment, to the needs of their state of the growth. So this is a very important thing. On the other hand, this would help development of the retail investors in the country, as well as development of institutional investors, such as, for instance, with the largest institutional investor which we have in the country now is the pension fund, which has just finalized the agreement with the depository. So hopefully we think that they'll be able to take more active part in developing and being an active player of the local capital markets in Georgia. Another aspect of this is attracting foreign investments. I think this is a very important part, as well, a very positive part of this developing capital markets. Overall, I would say that foreign investors like Georgian risk. I mean, the best examples of this were 2 Eurobond issuances which took place this year. The first was a sovereign Eurobond, and the second was the Eurobond placed by Georgian Railway. Both of these Eurobond issues was oversubscribed by 4 to 8 times. So very big demand and very good positioning of Georgian risk on the market. We have a we are in contact with a number of big investors on a regular basis, and they are looking to more and more Georgian papers coming to the market. So foreign investors know Georgian risk and they like taking Georgian risk, and it's important not only to provide papers to international capital markets, but trying to attract them to the local market as well. Another aspect of positive aspect of developing capital market is that this could be a partly solution for high dollarization in the country, just by creating the access to long-term lari on the market. This could be something of very important as well. And last but not least, creating the functional yield curve for the country. Overall, I think the integrated financial markets could also contribute to financial stability of the country. So I think we are very big believers in this. Galton Taggart has been working in this direction for years now, and we believe that Georgia could develop a local capital market, which could be used not only for Georgian companies, but also could try to act as a kind of regional hub for regional countries as well. That's all for my presentation, and I'll be ready for any questions if there are. Thank you.
Thank you, Otar. Very interesting. I think you added some more food for thought for us for our discussion section of this conversation, and I'm sure there were some also issues raised by you that Nugzar will pick up in his presentation. So our next speaker will be Mr. Nugzar Kachukhashvili, who spent more than 2 decades in US, was a very successful businessman here in US. After graduated Harvard Business School in the early 90s, like a new generation Georgian businessmen who arrived in the United States at that time. He went back to Georgia and led the remarkable, I would say, turnaround of Rustavi Steel company. And I would like him now to pick up on this and share his story a little bit, and also his views on future of Georgian economy.
Thank you, Mamuka. Thank you, distinguished speakers, participants. I'm going to start sharing my screen. I have a brief presentation about Rustavi Steel. It's all good, right? You can all see it, and I'm going to use this laser pointer, if it works, to point out a few of the things in the presentation. So Rustavi Steel is a story of an icon industrial base of Georgia, which was created in the 50s. It reached its heyday in like mid-80s, like old Georgia, when it was at its peak of economic development, still in the Soviet Union. So it was idle for like 20 years after the collapse of Soviet Union, and all the economic ties with other republics have been severed. And so it's shareholding, and then it's restructuring in last decade under the Western educated management. And I'm very proud to present that today we have completed one of the major industrial projects that took place in Georgia in recent history, and it has been a success. And especially I'm proud of the team because this happened during the pandemic area. And I'm going to share a few of the pictures, and later I'm going to say a few words about economy and to resonate what Otar said about what needs to be done to restructure, to change the structure of Georgian economy. Let's get started. Yes. Rustavi Steel is a US company. It's owned and managed. The management team is mainly comprised of US educated persons, and we have 2 product lines. It's steel rebar and steel seamless pipes. We have about 1,500 employees, and we export our products to the United States, to the EU countries, ex-CIS countries, India, South Korea, and other regional countries. We have a number of international quality certificates, which allows us to do the exports to these countries. A little bit of history. Rustavi Steel was started in 1948 as a Soviet initiative to bring steel production and industrialization to Georgia. During 44 to 99, Rustavi Steel made about 50 million tons of steel and other products, over 36 million tons of pipes, reinforcing bars, sheet metal, etc. In 1991, it stood idle as a result of the breakup of Soviet Union and was idle for 20 years. And it was looted. And when in 2011, we took control of the of Rustavi Steel, it was just mainly just bare walls. So in 2012, we started turnaround of the company. I joined the management in 2015. And as of today, I'm very proud to announce that Rustavi Steel is a Western style company, a major player on local and regional steel markets. Rustavi Steel, we are shipping and expanding our exports to all major markets worldwide. Seamless pipes, which is the most sophisticated technological product that Georgia has ever exported to developed countries throughout history. We not only remained 100% operational during the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown, but we also implemented and finalized and launched a revolutionary upgrade to steel production. And a few pictures, I'm going to show them to you. Then this slide shows archive pictures of the might of this plant that was in pure Soviet style, and it was icon of industrialization, not only for Georgia, but for the industrial base of post-war Soviet Union. And a few of the pictures of the plants that was there in 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Unfortunately, this picture was what we saw as a result of looting in 90s. It was totally ripped out. The factory, whole factory was scrapped and sold it for scrap to neighboring countries. All the machinery, all the equipment, all the inventory, nothing was left, just bare walls. And that's what we had to start with. And today I'm very proud to say that this is a new steel melt shop, which we just completed about 3 months ago, and it's now fully operational, and it's ramping up its production, which is a game changer for our pipe production and export potential of Georgia to the United States and to EU, of the most sophisticated product that Georgia has ever exported. These are also pictures of the newly completed project. It is most environmentally friendly and labor safe with highest labor safety standards in the region. Few of the pictures of one of the filters on the right, you see, this is oxygen plant, which is also a was part of this project complex. Continuous casting machine, a very beautiful picture, if you ask me. It means more than what it looks like. Same continuous casting machine, part of the machinery that we had to install. And this is especially important because you see in the difference between the previous picture, which had square billets coming out from continuous casting, and these are round billets. These are inputs to our pipe production, which we had to buy in Ukraine and Russia up until this point, and now we can make our own. This means our exports can skyrocket significantly within the next 6 to 9 months. Pipe rolling mill picture, which is a restored pipe rolling mill. It's the same one as was built during Soviet Union, but we had to totally overhaul it. Rustavi Steel, Rustavi Metallurgical Plant is interchangeable words in terms of brand and the company name. Again, we are exporting the most technologically sophisticated products to developing countries in mass quantities. First time in the history of independent Georgia. We are one of the best places for workers in the industry in Georgia in terms of high salary, labor safety, health insurance, free meals, and other benefits. We are one of the highest ecological and labor safety standards in Georgia. Our export potential by 2025 is United States dollars 300 million, which is incidentally double the amount of the whole wine industry export from Georgia. And LOMI 3, we call it LOMI, is a word in Georgian for lion. and this is project number 3, Lion 3 project, melt shop. Steel melt shop is one of the top 3 biggest industrial projects in the history of independent Georgia, and very proud to say that it's been completed. Despite all the challenges of COVID-19 with shipping and supply chain disruptions and you name it, transportation costs skyrocketing and some components missing and all those things, our team has managed to implement this project on time and on budget. And this is going to create more than 1,000 new skilled jobs by 2025. I'm going to go to the next slide. I'm going to zoom out right now and go to the helicopter level to the whole Georgia. And for that, I'm going to use next slide, which is the structure of Georgian economy. And the study was done in 2009. And I'll try to explain what this slide means. And it's very important. It resonates a lot with what Otar was saying about the importance of manufacturing. On the left side, we have the structure of the economy of Georgia. And on the right side, the structure of the economy of the EU. This study was done in 2009, but a picture today is very much similar to what was today. On the horizontal axis, we have the percentage of population, so it starts from 0 and 100. And on the vertical axis, we have the productivity, meaning how much value is being created by one person in the industry. And the same scale is on the left and on the right? And on the left, which is Georgia, it's very striking. There are 2 differences between Georgia and the EU I want to point out here. First, the number of people employed in agriculture is more than 50% in Georgia, whereas in EU is about less than 10%, right? And the productivity in agriculture in Georgia is much less per person than productivity of average a person employed in agriculture in EU. What Otar was saying again, I heard a lot of good things saying that we're exporting nuts, right? And we're importing chocolates. That means that the value add in just collecting and exporting just raw nuts is minimal in terms of creating value. And the fact that our productivity of agriculture is so low, that means it's pretty much subsistence farming. And that means pretty much that people are mainly working for themselves right here. And the second factor I want to point out from this chart is very important. You see this yellow part, which is manufacturing in the EU, obviously, which is a higher productivity than manufacturing in Georgia, given we don't have enough history to get more productive as of now. But the green area, which is service, you see the productivity of services in the EU is higher than productivity of manufacturing. And in Georgia, it's on the contrary, productivity of services in Georgia is lower than productivity of manufacturing in Georgia. That means that when in the EU, the services are understood as being high value added services like architecture, IT, design, whatever have you, right, on those high banking. In Georgia, services are mainly low productivity services like cab driving, hairdressing, hospitality, and so on, which requires very little skills. So the idea is to have the economy transferred from what we have today in Georgia towards where we want to be, which is in EU, right? And the easiest way to do it right now, this picture suggests that why don't we take a number of people from very low productivity agriculture service and into manufacturing service, which will increase the manufacturing employment in Georgia. Now, this is easier said than done, but we have done our share of it, right? What we have done is we have unlocked the value that was left to us from Soviet Union. We inherited from Soviet Union in terms of buried infrastructure, literally buried infrastructure in the ground, which costs a lot of money to build. But we applied and retrofitted it with newest technology that's available today. And we got the hybrid of old Soviet infrastructure plus newest technology, which makes us very competitive in making steel in the region. We have this so-called late move advantage because we do have the latest technology available at this time because we just implemented it, right? Now, however, this is not enough. We're going to create just 1,000 jobs, and that's pretty much it, maybe 2,000 in the best case scenario. So if this were to be done like 1,000 times what we have done, this will change the structure of Georgian economy and move about 50% of our population out of very low productivity agriculture job into high productivity manufacturing job. Now, the next question is, if you look at the chart, there are only 4% of FDI going into manufacturing in Georgia, right? And that's something to be concerned about. And the next slide shows that why this is so despite access to finance and so on. Actually, I talked to a lot of investors, Turkish and American and others, who were interested in investing in Georgia manufacturing, but that they have insurmountable challenges, right? First of all, legal framework is not serving manufacturing. If you look at our legal framework in terms of open markets and compliance to highest European safety and environmental standards, pretty much it tells you, look, very little chance for your manufacturing startup to succeed in Georgia, right? Because our borders are open to products manufactured under lower safety and environmental standards, and now the local people, we do have to compete with the low manufacturing costs that easily flows into Georgia, right? Second, again, trade policy, same thing, favors importers. And most importantly, the lack of services for manufacturing, right? We don't have any mechanical or engineering services, no research facilities that will tell you, look, if you take this part of soil, you can make this type of clay or ceramics, right? No certification labs that are good for investors. For example, I certify something in Georgia with which I can go to foreign investors and say, okay, why don't you invest in this manufacturing? And government's focus is somewhere else today, except on manufacturing. It's they say, look, we're going to have this innovation, startups, tourism, infrastructure, and so on, which is very good. But these areas, these factors are not going to serve as a pole for economic restructuring. Again, by economic structural change, I mean taking number of people out of low productivity agriculture jobs into manufacturing jobs, right? And then we have very limited general services like chemical waste treatment and so on. I did talk to some chemical, potentially chemical plant engine investors out of Turkey, and they say, look, just the chemical waste treatment plant costs north of $100 million on its own. And if we don't have that service available in the country, we cannot just build a whole infrastructure, whole vertical things, right? And these are the factors limiting manufacturing. So in the end, what I'm going to say is, first of all, manufacturing is the only way today known that will take Georgia out of its current economic situation and make into a developed countries. This can be done using government's proactive policy by creating services and certification labs and research facilities, which only government can do. Private sector is not incentivized to invest in those areas. And there's still a lot of buried treasure left by Soviet Union, like it was under Rustavi Steel's ground, and which we repurposed and we used it with using newest technology and ingenuity of our team and created it into the exporting machine, which will have its own share of success in filling the gap between import and export in the future. So with that said, that concludes my presentation, and I look forward to having a interesting discussion of what is to be done. Thank you, Mamuka.
Thank you, Nugzar. I think you gave us even more food for thought. So, that's what we expected from you. But it's a very interesting case, definitely to look and analyze and to utilize, maybe for others looking at Georgia's potential destination for investments. And all of your points are well taken. There are some, obviously, there will be some maybe ideas how to extrapolate them or some of the challenges to some of your suggestions. But I think that's a discussion that we need to have in order to move our economy forward. Our next speaker is our very good friend, as I've mentioned. Mr. Kenneth Angel has more than 2 decades of experience working with what is today called U.S. International Development Finance Corporation and what used to be Overseas Private Investment Corporation. And he led, I think, total investments of probably close to $1 billion over this more than 2 decades from DFC and partner private institutions. So Kenneth, maybe you will share your thoughts about, first of all, DFC experience in Georgia shortly, but also your views on how we can expand this partnership and deepen private sector development in Georgia. Kenneth? Yes, we can hear you now.
All right, let me share my screen. There we go. Thank you, Mamuka. Good morning to those in the United States and good evening to those in Georgia. Thank you, Mamuka and the America-Georgia Business Council for the opportunity to be on this panel and to present. Let me start by telling you a little bit about DFC and where we stand today. The Development Finance Corporation is the U.S. government's development finance institution. We partner with the private sector to finance solutions to the critical challenges facing the developing world today. Our mission is sort of threefold, but I would say that a good way to think of DFC is its soft power. DFC is a critical component in the soft power of the U.S. foreign policy. So DFC mobilizes private capital in the support of sustainable, broad-based economic growth and development. It helps overcome market gaps, increase transparency, achieve clearly defined economic and social development outcomes through private investments. So it's the combination. You've got the private sector, you have the foreign policy and the development, and it all crystallizes around DFC being able to move it forward. The toolkit that DFC has, is a combination of these 6 areas. Debt financing, which are direct loans and guarantees. There's equity investments that where DFC can provide direct equity to funds as well as to individual projects. Feasibility studies, which are used for the analysis of potential projects that DFC could finance. This is done on a co-financing basis. Investment funds, which are the support for emerging markets and the private equity funds. Political risk insurance, which is for currency inconvertibility, government interference, and political violence, including terrorism. And then last, but very important, is technical assistance. So it's a number of different tools to be able to use which can be used to be able to address a project. Next, these are the DFC's investment priorities, and this is built off of the Biden administration, the Build Back Better World, or B3 World. Being in Washington, you always like to have lots of acronyms. So the B3 World, focusing on climate. So this is climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. Global health, responding not only to the COVID-19, but also healthcare infrastructure. So this goes beyond, it involves water, sanitation, hygiene, food security, digital health, gender equity, very important to advance women's economic empowerment, as well as applying a gender lens to investment decisions. Internet connectivity and technology, so expanding the internet access to underserved communities. And then inclusive growth to be able to support projects to reduce extreme poverty and address income inequality. Now, what I'd like to do is give you an example of the lens through which DFC looks at projects. So one of them is climate. And so as we consider new projects globally, it will be increasingly important to consider how they reduce environmental impacts, including effects on water and air. New designs, inclusion of new technologies that run more efficiently, limit potential carbon emissions. So it is climate mitigation, trying to address what can be done for climate change. And then these efficient projects can help countries achieve their climate goals and protect the health of their citizens while enhancing their economic development. So we look at projects through both a climate lens as well as a gender equity lens. Those are just two examples in all of the climate, all of the project decisions, investment decisions that the DFC makes. Within DFC, it's they're sort of, DFC is looks at projects through, two broad hats. There, through two broad hats. One of them is credit, and the other is development. So because it's important, the idea of as a development finance institution, DFC is looking to achieve developmental goals, but you can only achieve those developmental goals with a viable business. And so we need to have a commercially viable business plan, successful track record. It's working with the private sector. There can be, and then what we want to look at is that it does not compete with commercially viable financing. So I guess the question to be addressed is, why is DFC needed? Or as we like to say, what is the additionality that DFC brings to the project? On the development side, the policy standards that are used, that all DFC projects must contribute to sustainable development goals. So it's development, and then it is environmental and social standards. There. I apologize for that. DFC is primarily focused on low income and lower middle income countries. There are some investments that are done in upper middle income countries, and Georgia is one of them. So DFC will support projects in upper middle income countries if the project meets one of the following. So it's a hard infrastructure project. These are your ports, energy distribution, transportation, water, telecommunications. 2, or it satisfies a U.S. connection of 25%, either in the form of equity or long-term management agreements that are involved in a project that has connection to the United States, or that the project is 2X, that is, it promotes women's economic empowerment, which are women-owned and managed projects, as well as financing for women, or 4th, that it is a highly developmental project. So in all of these, that's what would qualify a project because Georgia is an upper middle income country. In development, I think there are 3 sort of areas to take a look at, because different people look at what do you mean by a highly developmental project. So one would be growth indicators. This would be jobs. This would be contribution to GDP or local income enhancement. Second would be innovation. So transfer of technology, transfer of knowledge, deepening or broadening of markets. And the third area would be inclusion. So products or services that benefit marginalized populations and small and medium-sized enterprises. So growth indicators, innovation, and inclusion. Those are the elements that one looks at to aim for a highly developmental project. So in Georgia, since 1993, OPIC, and then later on the follow-on has been the Development Finance Corporation, DFC, has provided over $650 million in project finance to about 50 private sector projects. And here, what I want you to take a look at is it's a highly diversified portfolio. It touches a broad array of sectors. And so here we have about 700 million, 750 million of project finance and political risk insurance. And there are bonus points if you can identify the sectors and the projects in the pictures that you'll see in this slide and the next few slides. But I think it's one of the broadest sectors that DSC does in any one country. So in our pipeline, we currently have applications in the following sectors: logistics, hotels, and renewable energy in wind power. Areas that we'd be interested in looking at, agribusiness. I think that as Nungar talked about, what can be done to enhance the production of agribusinesses. Logistics, very important to be able to build upon that. Infrastructure, particularly with energy and telecommunications, healthcare, and financial services. So I'd like to now just briefly talk about 3 projects to give you a sense as to what it is that DFC has been working on. This next one was one that was just done this year. It was to bolster the economic recovery. We've got an example of 3 DFC finance projects in Georgia that have strong developmental impacts. So in this first one, DSC helped micro and small, medium-sized enterprises that have been impacted by COVID-19. So DFC partnered with the Bank of Georgia to provide liquidity facilities for these MSMEs that have been impacted by the economic crisis from COVID-19. The second example is expanding trade capacity. DFC financing is supporting the expansion and modernization of the Port of Poti, including the development of a new marine terminal, which is helping to bolster trade and facilitate investment in the region. The project will be the first port in Poti to handle large vessels up to 253 meters in length, and with the capacity to carry up to 50,000 tons of cargo. The improved port will increase the trading capacity for Georgia. The third example is enhancing the healthcare capacity of Georgia. DEFC financing is supporting the construction and operation of the American Hospital Tbilisi, located in Tbilisi. It's the first US managed hospital in Georgia. It's the first JCI, that means the Joint Commission International Certified Full Service Hospital in Georgia, confirming the international operating standards and best practices in the quality of care and services, helping to elevate the healthcare in Georgia. This shows it's the healthcare infrastructure. It involves the transfer of knowledge. It involves jobs. It involves, it's a catalyst or demonstration project that has the effect of promoting the best practices and operating standards. And it has capacity building for doctors and nurses. So this is just a preview now of the project that is going to go into a further presentation to be later in the conference. But these were just some examples of what we have, of what DFC is doing. So what I wanted to say in summary is that DFC is not stopped during the pandemic. DFC is open in Georgia for viable developmental projects. DFC has done much in Georgia over the past almost 30 years, and much more can be done. Georgia is an important partner for the US in the region, as shown by the amount of resources that OPIC and DFC have invested in Georgia. So with that, I will conclude my presentation. So.
Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you very much. It's very encouraging to see that more than $200 million went to Georgia. Probably total cost of these projects are higher even, but with the Bank of Georgia loan facility and investments in the hospital project and PACE terminal, these are the very significant scale investments. So we have now less than 20 minutes left before noon. So, and I know that it's not enough time to solve all the problems of Georgian economy for future, but what I would like to do, use this time very, very efficiently and maybe ask all of our speakers, and starting with James now, maybe use just 2 minutes if you can, please, to maybe comment what have picked up from other people's presentation and how you see, let's say, your perspective maybe adjusted a little bit, or you see that it's enhanced your perspective on what's going on in terms of Georgian economy. So I'd like you to comment on other people's presentations, but from the perspective, what can be done in next maybe 5 years or decade or so? What type of strategic kind of emphasis needs to be put in place in order to really achieve significant growth? You mentioned about 5% growth average. Is it enough? Probably not. So we need to, how to accelerate the growth of Georgian economy, just based on what you picked up from other speakers' presentations. But try to fit it in 2 minutes, please.
Sure, let me try to do that. Very interesting presentations from all, so this is great. I think to maybe try to draw some of these things together and think about, so we had highlighted in our article for the high unemployment and also that there could be some further investments to boost productivity and make growth stronger and more inclusive. So I think Otar really hit the nail on the head in terms of thinking about FDI. And I think maybe I'd pick up on Nuskar talking about sort of the composition of employment and the value added. And so I think that's what we're trying to say is if you could get more people into formal employment and maybe moving from agriculture to other sectors, but I don't want to give up on agriculture either. Not that we pretend to be sectoral experts, but it sounds like there could be some potential for additional, I think agribusiness was mentioned by a few people. So then thinking about how to get this to happen, I think the infrastructure investment that's going on is very important. So to unlock new regions, make it easier to get businesses going in other regions and to get products out of the country or across the country. That's important. The education and training. So I think if we're going to have a stronger manufacturing sector or higher value added sectors, you do need to make sure you have good matching between the skills that people are acquiring in skills in schools and training. And we do hear from some business people that there are skill mismatches that, you know, lead to this issue that you have relatively high unemployment, which seems a bit surprising. So those are, I would say, are some of the key things. I maybe had one question for Nusgar, and maybe I should add. So there are issues, say, about like land ownership, right? This is something if you wanted foreign investors to come in and help boost agribusiness. This is not maybe in general. Georgia has a very favorable business climate, but maybe this is one area where it's not so favorable. And I think Nusgar had mentioned that there's some legal obstacles, and you know, this is not favorable for manufacturing startups. I would be interested to hear a little bit more, maybe what he had in mind there. Maybe I stopped. There's a lot to cover, but I do appreciate the great comments from all the colleagues.
Otar?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you everyone. The presentations were quite interesting. I think from my perspective, what I would add is that the country clearly needs a strategy. Basically, being pragmatic, we are a poor country with limited resources. Even though we have, I think Georgia is one of the country which has the most support from IFIs, like even OPIC or DFI Now or any other IFC, BRD, all those institutions which have been supporting us for years. We still remain a country which is with limited resources. So I think we need to concentrate on what we want to achieve first of all, and then think whether we can achieve it. So I think the most important thing is we need to look forward. I mean, Georgia, since our last 10-year history, which has been quite turbulent, we get used to looking quite short-sighted, basically. So I think we need to become more ambitious. I think we need to look forward and decide what's our plan. For instance, in 5 to 10 years, what should be our GDP? And we should drive from there. We cannot build, I don't believe that you can build the economy from bottom up. I think you need to have a target. You need to say that my GDP today is this, and my GDP should be that. And then you think backwards, saying, can I achieve it? And if I can, how can I achieve it? And then everything will just fit in the boxes, and everybody will start doing what they need to do in order to achieve success. Because you need to understand what a success is in order to celebrate success. And once you answer the question where we are heading or where we want to head, then I think we are quite intelligent and kind of adaptable country, and I think we can do everything once we know where we're heading. That's, I think, one of the things we have to take from the presentations.
Nusgar, please. Thank you, Otar.
Thank you, thank you both for the comments. And I think Otar and I are very like-minded people. We should meet like over lunch tomorrow or something. To do like Georgian economic development, right? And our goal is inclusivity. Make sure that all people get some benefit of the economic development, right? In terms of numbers, today GDP per capita, which is the best measure of how the economy is doing per person basis, how well the country is doing, is about the level of 1987, when still Georgia was still part of the Soviet Union. Then there was a sharp drop, and then a very impressive climb, which again, we haven't exceeded the level of 1987. The difference is, though, that back then, the distribution of the wealth was more equal than it is today. So we have people who are doing so much better, very few people who are doing so much better than in 1987, and the vast majority of people doing so much worse than in 1987. So if our goal is to lift the economy so that every person in Georgia benefits from it, more or less, I mean, I'm not preaching socialism or anything like that. Obviously, who is more apt and able and adaptable, they should benefit a little bit more than who don't want to work. But at the same time, inclusivity should be there. And I view the economic development as three major factors. One is short-term economic development. Second is long-term economic development. And the third one is employment. And I'm going to spend like a couple of seconds on each of those. Short-term economic development is the government programs that doing infrastructure works and subsidizing, not subsidizing, but incentivizing some of the activities like harvesting and so on. And with pretty much government is doing very well, right? They do have good
social programs. The government is doing good economic works, and it does the there's economic benefit short term. However, this is not gonna, again, transform economy. It's gonna be a very slow, painful process for next 30, 40, 50 years, and we're not gonna see any break if you wanna become a country as wealthy as one of European countries or the United States, right? Thus, there needs to be a program for long-term economic development through economic restructuring, which I guess what Otar was talking about. That means there needs to be a proactive initiative from the government to create new industries. The study of economic development for the last 50 years has shown single-handedly that unless there are creation of new economic activities, meaning new industries, there's not going to be fast economic development, more than 5%, right? And it also has shown that the private sector alone is not capable of creating new industries. There needs to be government proactive initiatives saying, look, there are like 17 industries I would be interested in helping helping private sector to create it, right? I'm not saying the government should create them. Again, we've seen what that's like in terms of Soviet Union and some of the failed cases in South America. However, the government should create supporting services like certification labs, like outside services, so that it eases the cost of private sector to see how beneficial would be this or that economy, this or that economic activity, this or that industry. Obviously, there's going to be failures. The experiments that now have been conducted, that now part of the success stories in countries like Taiwan, Singapore, Chile, Peru, have shown that once you have created many industries, 3 or 4 will remain, and they will become the backbone of economic restructuring. And unless there are new industries creating, there hasn't been a case in the history of the developing economy that there will be economic restructuring of the country. Now, to James's question about legal framework, right? I'm gonna say just one of the latest initiatives by the government, so that they said that we're gonna liberalize the energy market, meaning that the energy producers and energy suppliers, and Rustavi Steel is one of the major energy, electricity power consumers, right? There needs to be a market created, and they're mandating us to go into free market starting next year, January 1, right? And which we all for free markets because we are good payer, and usually the consumers, the producers like working with us because we're steady consumers and good payers, and we have good credit rating and so on. However, the government is choosing not to include cheap power generations in the market pool. And what kind of market is that? Okay, so on one hand, they say, look, we're gonna let you go free float on the market. On the second hand, on the second hand, they say, oh, we're gonna leave only the expensive power generations available to you. That means saying that, guys, the electricity rate is gonna go up, and we're gonna sugarcoat it as if we're doing these free market things. And there are a number of cases like that, right? And like I said, again, we've been mandated to go to the highest standards of environmental protection, right? And also labor standards, whereas our neighbors, for example, in Azerbaijan, don't have those standards. And the rebar they manufacture is going to be cheaper and subsidized, again, with energy costs than ours. At the same time, we have no protection in terms of import from Azerbaijan. So that puts us in a disadvantaged position, saying that if I'm a foreign investor and I don't have any, let's say, moral attachment to Georgia, again, I'm Georgia, I was born in Georgia and I love this country, right? But let's say I didn't.
and I want to make investment in steel, I would think really hard where would be a better place to make investment, in Georgia or Azerbaijan, because if I make investment in Azerbaijan, yes, business environment is not as friendly. However, I have access to Georgian market freely, and I don't have those harsh labor and environmental standards as I do have in Georgia. Whereas in Georgia, I can go through all these troubles, set up a manufacturing, and I cannot export to Azerbaijan because of these non-tariff barriers Azerbaijan is creating on their border. So I'm at clear disadvantage, and there's no legal framework with which I can do this thing. So.
Okay, thank you, Nugzar. You took more than 2 minutes of your time.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry. I apologize. I can go hours. No, but that's
okay. Kenneth, please, 2 minutes, and then I have to conclude this because unfortunately we are running out of time. So, Kenneth, please.
Thank you, Mamuka. I'd like to just echo what some of my fellow panelists have talked about. I agree with Otar in the sense of where does Georgia want to be? Where do they want to go? And for that, what is needed is strategic planning. And I agree that it can't just be short term, but something that is long term. Does Georgia want to be a hub? A hub for what? And then, you know, focus on those different areas. One other thing that Otar talked about is the need for direct investment. That's certainly something that can be done by DFIs such as DFC and EBRD and IFC that come in, as well as others. There are a lot of development and international financial institutions that are involved with that. But I think for investors to be able to come in, I think that there are two broad or three broad areas. One would be judicial reforms. There is a hesitancy in investors potential investors to invest due to not having objective judiciary. So judicial reforms to continue to work on that. Second would be the legal reforms that Nugzar talked about. So try to look at the different sectors and see where the laws can be changed to be able to help those sectors. And then the third would be economic reforms. I think that Georgia has done a lot in the area of economic reforms. It's crafted itself a reputation as one of the easiest places in the world to do business. However, there's not been a lot of FDI that has come from that, and everyone has sort of danced around it. And why? Well, I think that there are different factors that go behind it. One is the judiciary. I think the politics that we mentioned before, and it's taken a hit. It's disputed elections, how that might affect it. But I think that causes investors to view the information that Georgia's an easy place to do business is perhaps not as strong as they would, as Georgia likes to think that it is. So I think that it begins to be a little bit of a misnomer. But let me just stop that and turn it over to you, Mamuka. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Unfortunately, there are several questions, and I promised to those who are asking these questions to get back to them and direct these questions to speakers and maybe respond by email later on. But just wanted to summarize this discussion. Actually, purpose of this panel was really to, first of all, demonstrate that even in these difficult times of pandemic, there is some resilience shown by Georgian economy. There are many issues and many challenges there, but on one hand, there is a resilience shown by economy, which was actually built on previous reforms and previous successes in last several decades, but also some of the private investments were made during these difficult times, and this is also encouraging. If people were investing in these difficult times, it means that there is a definitely expectation that things will move to the positive direction going forward. There is one kind of big philosophical question here, based on discussion that Nugzar and Otar and others sort of, and all of our speakers initiated, is that how much of this economic development and focus on strategy can be organized and how much it can be sort of based on openness and just freedom of operations and so forth. I think there's this famous saying of Ludwig von Mises, of the free marketeer, saying that progress cannot be organized. Okay, clearly there is a balance needs to be in place between what is government responsibility and what is a private sector responsibility. And I think it's an essential element to look at this balance from healthy point of view. And I think we need more discussion on this subject going forward. But most important, as I said, element is to see, I mean, James, you mentioned about privatization and also some of the ownership of land and so forth. There are still too much assets in the hands of state in Georgia, and but how to transfer this asset in efficient management hands? So that's a challenge, of course, and this is a part that needs to be done, and this is the part that government needs to do it in terms of getting rid of those assets. Let's put it this way, in order to put them in a more efficient, more productive sort of hands, as Nugsar mentioned. And as we see from your experience, Nugsar, that private ownership and private interest is the more efficient way of managing those assets that state has in hands than otherwise. So I think I would like to apologize to our speakers that we didn't have more time to have your additional input, but as you know, we'll come back to this discussion going forward, and maybe we'll organize some of the more close, maybe a seminar about these issues and roundtable discussion. And I think we need to keep these points in our mind in order to make sure that Georgia really attracts enough foreign direct investments, creates enough jobs for employment, exports more, and so forth. So creates a healthy economic opportunities so that people no longer leave country but stay there or come back for those who are no longer living in Georgia. So thanks to all for your participation. You can